Welcome to the 28th episode of Democracy at the Crossroads, a platform where we speak truth to power. In today's program, we'll discuss a striking aspect of the freedom of the official media in the UK and the USA, two prominent liberal democracies of the world. Just look at this. Both United Kingdom and United States of America have declared Hamas, that rules over the Gaza Strip, as a terrorist organization. But both British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, Broadcaster of Great Britain, Public Broadcaster of Great Britain, and Voice of America, VOA, which is the tax-funded broadcaster of the United States of America, refused to designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. What defiance! What assertion of independence! The question we are asking is this: can our public broadcaster, Doordarshan, show a fraction of that independence in India? Let us discuss the issue in some detail. On October 7, Hamas launched a barbaric attack on the Israeli civilians that killed more than 1,400 men, women, and children. A large part of the world, including the UK and the US, condemned this October 7 attack by Hamas as a terrorist act. But both the BBC and the VOA have persisted with their policy. They refuse to call it a terrorist attack. They use the adjective militant instead of terrorist to describe the October 7 attack on Israelis by Hamas. Here let us just discuss the BBC for reasons of paucity of time. Is the state-first policy of the BBC not to describe any organization as terrorist, even if the British government has designated those organizations as terrorist outfits? And Hamas is no exception. This position of the BBC has caused a storm, a fierce backlash from the government. But the BBC has refused to budge from its stand. The BBC says, while Israeli government or British government, for that matter, describe Hamas as terrorist, the BBC has no problem in using the word terrorist while quoting those authorities. But the BBC's own reporter or the BBC host on our own will not use the word terrorist while describing the Hamas atrocities on Israeli civilians. Why so? The BBC is unfettered. While reporting on a conflict between two parties, it will refuse to describe one party as terrorist, and that would amount to taking sides in a conflicting situation. Journalists must not take sides, is said, while reporting any violence and counter-violence. It must present facts objectively, BBC says. The BBC reminds us that while reporting on brutal killings of Palestinians by Israelis in the last several decades, no BBC reporter has ever described Israeli action as a terrorist act. BBC asserts that it's a matter of journalistic integrity. It wants to live up to the high standard of objectivity it has set for itself. Its position will not change just because it is public funded and the British government stands with Israel and condemns Hamas as a terrorist outfit. How has the British government responded to this? An enraged British Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, has reacted sharply to this BBC position. He says, I actually think it is verging on disgraceful This idea that there is some sort of equivalence, the equivalence between Hamas attack and Israeli attack. Saps goes on to say Hamas has been declared a proscribed, a terrorist organization in the UK. They are not freedom fighters. They are not militants. They are pure and simple terrorists. But it's remarkable to go to the BBC website and still see them, BBC people, talking about government militants and not calling them terrorists. But mind you, after saying this, the British Defence Secretary doesn't threaten to disrupt the taxpayer funding of the BBC. He, along with the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, Culture Secretary Lucy Fletcher, all of them urge BBC to revise its policy. Even the leader of the opposition in Great Britain, Labour leader Keir Starmer, says he sees Hamas as a terrorist outfit. But even he doesn't threaten that he will squeeze BBC funding when the Labour comes to power. He just wants BBC to explain what he calls the public broadcaster's unfortunate decision not to call Hamas a terrorist organization. The BBC's Director of Editorial Policy and Standards, David Jordan's response is quite forthright. He says the BBC's job is to place the facts before its audience, to enable the audience to make their own assessments about who is doing what to whom. And it says it's ready to face consequences for standing up to its position. I consider BBC a true torchbearer of editorial standard. And it deserves a salute that it's defying the authorities, its own government, to uphold its journalistic principle. What is indeed striking is that BBC, a public broadcaster, is thriving and going strong. It's enjoying enormous credibility despite refusing to toe the government line. Imagine our Doordarshan, our own public broadcaster, refusing to describe Hamas attack as terrorist, even after our Prime Minister has openly sided with Israel against Hamas terrorism. Will poor Doordarshan survive even for a day? We Indians should ponder over this question if we are concerned about our democracy.